Landing in Israel for the first time was a confusing experience. As I navigated this new place, I found myself in need of grounding, something familiar, and the feeling of community. Things a bit more substantive than a cheeseburger could provide. In the internet age, it took only a couple of searches to find the name and approximate location. That pin on my screen took some work to get to, though. The way in involved going around the back of a dance club, up a creaky set of stairs, and knocking on a door with a small sign in the window. I remember thinking to myself, is there going to be a password of some sort? It turned out there wasn't, but it did feel as though it had taken most of my life to get to that place of stepping over the threshold. Finally, I opened the door and was there. I had arrived at the only gay bar in Jerusalem, and it felt like home. Inside was a small room with a bar, a patio, and a tiny, tiny dance floor. Throughout the evening, I met several locals, a few other travelers from multiple countries, and the owner. The conversations were some of the best I had throughout my travels in Israel. It was also one of the few spaces where I saw people from Christian, Muslim, and Jewish traditions all interacting at once in the same place. People spoke openly about who they were and their religious identities. There were common touchstones for each of us that night, made up of Disney karaoke songs sung in Hebrew, rainbow flags, and an ability to cross boundaries of gender and sexuality that were far more rigid beyond the boundaries of that bar. After a few conversations, I sat back to people watch. I saw dancing, a birthday celebration, and conversations happening in several languages all night long. Many people came to Israel to deepen their connection to their religious heritage. This was especially true of the gay Jewish people that I met. Since living in Israel, they have had to fight for rights as LGBTQ people that they had lost in the migration across borders. This bar turned out to be one of the most diverse places I would inhabit during my travels. It wasn't until toward the end of my trip that I began to think back on this early experience and appreciate just how different a space this was. It was a space that allowed for people to be their whole selves, and by claiming a shared community, move past some of the constructed barriers just outside that screen door. This morning, I invite us to explore the idea of intentional religious community and how it is different from the other ways we might gather together. Our congregations have the potential to be places where we can bring all of who we are. We carry not just one or two, but a Rolodex of identities. I believe a few people in this room may know what a Rolodex is. I actually have used them. We have racial identities, gender, ethnic, sexual, cultural, socioeconomic, and theological identities. Yes, even we Unitarian Universalists have theological identities. Though these may not be always our first stop as we flip through identity groups. Until I began my move towards ministry, my religious or theological identities were in the mix, but lower on the list. I moved through the world as male, white, gay, and a Democrat. It was usually later in conversation that the topic of religion might come up. I felt I had cultivated a crop of identities I could stand behind and really live into. Then there was faith. I was a member of a Unitarian Universalist congregation. Prior to that, I had worked for a different UU congregation. I was a religious liberal, supported liberal religious communities, and even made a living working for them. But I was bashful about it. Today, I am far less bashful about the many pieces of me that make up my whole self. However, I see part of this discomfort being based in lack of control of the story. I believe many of you in this community have a sense of what it means to have lack of control of perhaps your space, or where we're going next, or what time the worship service starts. The understanding that my life story is stepping into an already existing story has been challenging for me at times. My life has histories and contexts I didn't get a say in. What people think when they say I go to church has meaning for others, I may not agree with. I had little choice in most of the identities I hold today. It was the discovery of language to describe them that has led to my being able to embrace them more fully as my own. I am also asking us to pair this idea of who we are with how we come together to form communities. Communities like Tapestry. It is in intentional spaces like this one that we discover how our personal stories connect and change the larger stories of communities. We may learn words that describe who we've always been, but could not name. We may find a place of belonging where before we thought of ourselves as outsiders. These relationships created in communities are where I have consistently found strength, as well as a sense of purpose and meaning. Relationships that transform individuals into a community are where I find the closest thing to the holy in my life. They are an everyday sort of magic, kindled through chance moments, which grow into bonds that stretch through time and create sacred spaces. Spaces we may call church, or familiar, or home, or just safe. While one can rarely know when those encounters will begin something deep and life-changing, there are ways we can increase the odds that that magic will happen. This social technology we call community has led me to help continue to create places like this one. Each of us adds a piece to this community every time we walk through that door, send a message to another member, and participate in or create congregational programming. Community can be a tough thing to define, though. It comes in many shapes and sizes. But why do we gather at all? We questioners, searchers, agnostics, and theists, why do we gather as Unitarian Universalists? As religious liberals? I do not believe we gather first for worship, or to learn, or even to deepen our commitment to our faith traditions. Those pieces are definitely part of the answer, but I believe we gather in community most to deepen our relationships to others, which in turn deepens our own humanity. Our world is one that encourages individualism and separation from one another. We are rewarded for self-sufficiency and personal financial success. We are given little time to support the needs of those beyond our immediate families. We are encouraged to fear those who are different from us. Our faith calls us to respond. The work to change this world for the better and to not let fear be the driver of our interactions with one another is what centers Unitarian Universalism for me. One way we do this is to practice building community and forming relationships of mutuality. Religion that encourages us to connect to others and to care for one another beyond boundaries is in fact a countercultural way of being in this world. This is why places like Tapestry are needed so desperately. A joining of many threads and many beliefs into one community. An idea as seemingly old as religion can be both new and radical in the right context, such as a country where the threads of peace, and society and common decency are at times torn, and we need to learn how to be together again and again. I invite you today, this very afternoon, to find a way to connect even more deeply to others in creating community. Attend the next protest or march you see advertised. Attend perhaps a meeting about how to care deeply for one another here at Tapestry. Join a group like Showing Up for Racial Justice. Get involved in local politics, or more deeply involved than you already are. Donate to organizations fighting for justice and the vision that we are all in this together. Organizations like Black Lives Matter or Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. Find ways to support those who have lost everything to extreme weather and are at risk of losing everything to extreme politics. As you commit to action with others, I ask one more thing of you. Talk with those people about why you are doing what you are doing. How does Unitarian Universalism call you to do what you do? Find a place and a people to do this work with you. You are not alone. Just look around right now at all of the people here, at all of those who share your values and commitments. Take a risk, and after this service, find a buddy and help one another. It is here with Unitarian Universalists that you can connect values to action. For me, it was a visit to church, in this case, First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, that rekindled a connection to religious identity. I found a group of people who reflected the thoughts and aspirations that had been growing within me throughout my childhood and early adulthood. In a UU community, I discovered that I could bring my full self, and someone fascinated with the religious, though sometimes wary of it as well. I am no longer wary. In fact, I am filled with hope in the power of our congregations to transform lives and the world in which they are built. My stepping into religious space as a seeker required layers of loving relationships with people who demonstrated the good in such practices after I had encountered the bad. I knew about UU churches. At that time, I worked at one every weekday. I had heard about other congregations nearby from fellow staff members, from mentors, and from congregants. However, it took learning about places like this one, from many sources of overlapping trust, before I took a risk to show up in person. People like you here this morning are who got me to take that risk. A risk some of you may be taking this very morning, or have taken not too long ago, or perhaps decades ago. That first Sunday, I sang psalms I did not know. I shook hands with people I had just met. I heard a sermon reflect my values. I felt welcomed and not asked to leave parts of me at the doorstep. I didn't join instantly. However, I quickly felt at home. The people in that space are what created that feeling. There was good music and wise words, but just as importantly, there were kind people. In the years since that day, I have realized that I have always loved religious community. It was a place that welcomed my whole self I was missing. It was people that valued relationships with each other more than the worship of ideas that I was craving. To help us imagine what this can look like, I share part of Margaret Wheatley's poem, Turning to One Another. There is no power greater than a community discovering what it cares about. Ask what's possible, not what's wrong. Keep asking. Notice what you care about. Assume that many others share your dreams. Be brave enough to start a conversation that matters. Treasure curiosity more than certainty. Invite in everybody who cares to work on what's possible. Know that creative solutions come from new connections. Remember, you don't fear people whose story you know. Real listening always brings people closer together. Trust that meaningful conversations can change your world. Rely on human goodness. Stay together. Wheatley's poem highlights for me the idea that being in community together well takes practice. It requires the creation of many threads to one another. This is the great challenge of the ongoing experiment of covenantal religion without creeds. The challenge each of us accepts when we claim a religious identity full of questions and short on simple answers. We need spaces to tell our stories to others if we are to create traditions and practices capable of holding us in relationship to the complex world in which we find ourselves. Ours is a faith that calls us to welcome in the curious and the radical. Not only are we perhaps the most protesting of Protestants, but we have the potential to be the most relational of rationalists as well. We do not need to agree on doctrine to move forward on intentional and deep relationships. In a world of created differences, we cannot be those who collapse humanity into sameness. Instead, we must be the people who ask ourselves how to create resilient communities out of differences. Each of us has a unique story of survival and searching that brings us here this morning. Each of us also hold within us unknown possibilities. We did not get to choose the cultural context for our beliefs. Through living our lives and practicing our faith, we are choosing a place to be within the conversation. We have chosen Unitarian Universalism. Perhaps this choice is the affirmation of the choices of our parents or our ancestors. Or for many of us, a choice we made freely for ourselves. Either way, we have chosen these people here this morning to be our people. If I believe in any supernatural force in the universe that cannot be measured or fully understood by science, it is the power of human relationships to change what is possible. We continue to do amazing and powerful things, the most awe-inspiring of which are those that create, reimagine, and change our world into something more, not less. It is through religious community that I see us practicing the tools to do this reimagining. They are places set aside in people's lives where we can learn context from the past, develop practices to be more grounded in the present, and pass something on through this participation to those who will come after us. My hope for this community is that we create here that feeling I had walking through a screen door into a tiny bar in the heart of Jerusalem. That feeling of homecoming and safety in a world that doesn't always allow us to be fully who we are. To paraphrase a certain skin horse we heard from earlier, community doesn't happen all at once. You become a member of community. It takes time, but once you are a community, you can't undo it. It lasts for always.